Welcome to the Ogles channel. Thanks for watching today. And today we're starting a brand new series called Journeying Through Every Game Boy Game. Now, there's like 900 of them, or a little over 900 between the Game Boy and the Game Boy Color. And this series is going to take me a heck of a long time. But I had so much fun going through the Mega Man games on the Game Boy. And I realized, like, when I went through the Contra games as well, there are so many great games on the Game Boy that I never got to experience growing up, or that I did get to experience. And I just want to talk about them for a little bit. And so I decided to create this series where I'm just going to go through every Game Boy game, give it a playthrough, and then do a full commentary about the game and just really break the game down and all that the game has to offer. Now, I'm starting the series off of a game that I never got to play growing up, surprisingly, called Kirby's Dream Land, which is it's an iconic game. I never just never got to play it. I had the NES game, Kirby's Adventure, and I even had Kirby's Dream Land too, but I never had just simply Kirby's Dream Land. And so that's the first game I'm going to start off with. Now, every week I'm going to journey through a different game. I'm just going to probably choose them at random for a while. But if there's a game you'd like me to journey through, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll work that into the schedule as quick as I can and get a full journey through and commentary of that game as well. Now, I always like to start these videos off by looking at the box art first, and the box art for Kirby's Dream Land is pretty legit here because Kirby does not look like his normal self. Kirby's always portrayed in every other game after this one as a little pink blob or a little pink balloon creature. I really don't know what Kirby is, truth be told, but he's always pink. And in this cover, he's actually white. And I actually read somewhere long ago that they didn't know what color they wanted to make Kirby, since it was simply going to be a Game Boy game that's in pretty much black and white. And so they just decided to leave him white on the cover. And so we actually have the only rendition of Kirby as a white blob instead of a little pink blob. So that's sort of neat. We also have in the background one of his main foes for at least this game, and I know for the NES game as well, and that's Wispy Woods in the background. And Wispy Woods is like, I mean, my gosh, he's like in every Smash Brothers game. I think he's probably more iconic for Smash Brothers at this point, but there he is. There's old Wispy Woods in the background, and of course a few other Kirby enemies as well scattered about. Overall, a pretty great cover that symbolizes an era of Kirby that's often forgotten about. Now, when you start the game up here, you have a nice little title screen here, some good animations going on, but more than just the animations, you have one of the most iconic video game theme songs ever written. And this is a Kirby theme song, at least for the Dreamland Part 1, and it may continue on for the other games, but I definitely know this song because it's actually the ringtone on my cell phone. And so I hear this song like literally every single day. And I still love it. It's a great song. And I knew it was from Kirby's Dream Land. I just simply had never really played this particular game so much, but I just love the way this song sounds so much that it's of course my ringtone. Now, the first level you're going to go into is called Green Green, which I think is actually a pretty fitting name for a Kirby level because it's just so simple that it's fun. And that really sums up Kirby in a lot of ways. Now, as soon as you go into the level, you're going to notice Kirby has all its normal little moves. He can puff himself full of air. He's got a little suck move, suck enemies in. He can puff himself up and jump, fly up into the air, puff his little puff ball out or his air out, and attack enemies. But the puff move is a little bit different than I anticipated. I felt like in Smash Brothers you could just simply, push the jump button to continue to puff, but you actually have to push jump and then the up button to continue to puff and, fly upwards. Just a little bit different control-wise than I thought. I don't know if that changes as the Kirby games go on, or if that's just something in Super Smash Brothers. That I don't know, but it did throw me off a little bit. Now, also, you're going to notice in the first Kirby game, one of his most iconic powers, or his most iconic abilities, is actually missing. He can suck enemies in, and he can, I guess, sort of dissolve them, but he doesn't actually take their powers. He just simply gets rid of the enemies. He can spit them back out and attack, but his ability to absorb enemies and steal their powers is absent in this game. And I didn't realize that the first Dreamland game didn't have that as a power. I don't know when that's added in for Kirby. I know it's at least in the NES game, and I think it's in Dreamland too, from my memory, but it is absent from the first Kirby game, which caught me by surprise a little bit. Now, as you travel through Green Greens, you're going to notice that pretty much all the enemies in this level are some of the most iconic Kirby enemies that there are. You're going to have things like little mushroom people, little circus people here, with little birds in the air. I mean, these are really basic Kirby enemies. The only one that really caught me off guard was this Ninja Bear, and I don't know if he appears in more of the other Kirby games, but I'm like, it's just such a random enemy in the level. But hey, I mean, Kirby's known for being sort of wacky. Ninja Bear fits right in. But this first level here, it really just sums up Kirby in general in so many ways. So many of the core enemies are here. So many of the core mechanics are here. Even like the Maximum Tomatoes, some of the items and whatnot, the little soda bottles, they're all here in the first level. And also in the first level, you get to fight the most iconic Kirby villain that there ever was, which is Wispy Woods. Now, I know some people would call, King Dedede the most iconic Kirby villain. Not to me. Wispy Woods is, of course, to me, the most iconic Kirby villain, and you get to fight him right here in the first stage of the game. He's a really easy boss to go against. You just simply suck in the apples and fire him at him, and he's, of course, every now and then throws out some wind to try to, attack you with that. And pretty basic, pretty easy, but it's an iconic fight, and it's just really cool to see the first rendition of where Wispy Woods came from. Now, the second level caught me completely by surprise and gave one of the greatest nods to one of the greatest games that's ever existed as far as like retro games go, because it's also created by HAL Laboratories, or just I guess HAL at this point, and that is Lolo, because you're actually going to be fighting what's called Castle Lolo, and we're going to get to a special guest appearance here about halfway through the level and at the end of the level as well. You can probably guess who it's going to be, but I loved the game Lolo as a kid, and the idea that you're actually going to get to fight a 2D game through Castle Lolo or through the same levels as Lolo. Iconic. And I love that they worked this into the Kirby game. Because at the time, Lolo really was like HAL Laboratories' big character. Kirby wasn't existing at this point. This is his first game. So they're actually sort of connecting their two franchises together. And I just think that's awesome. Now, Castle Lolo inside the Kirby game here actually takes more of a haunted aesthetic, because you have things like bats in the level and ghosts in the level and these little witches with brooms and whatnot. They're not flying on the brooms. They're actually just sort of cleaning up Castle Lolo. Almost reminds me more of what you saw in that Disney movie Fantasia, where you had those little dancing brooms. It at least reminds me of that. And it's a cool little aesthetic inside this castle. The castle does have some underwater parts, and I found it odd that Kirby can't like suck in water and make himself big and float through the water. But I guess that also makes sense, because I mean, if you just sucked in the water, Kirby would just sort of sink to the bottom. So I guess physics-wise, that actually checks out completely. Also, this level is way more open than the first level. The first level is really much of a just a straightforward left to right level. A few little doorways to go into. This level has so many branching paths that you can go into. It's hard to really know which path you want to go on. But I just sort of picked a path at random and it worked out, which sort of means to me that most of these paths are probably going to interloop with each other. And you can probably just sort of choose your path and get to the end of the level whichever way you wanted to. It reminded me a little bit of some of those Mario 3 levels that I really didn't like, where you had to choose like a specific path to go on. You just had to keep looping back over and over and over till you finally found the one correct door inside the little castle to get out of. This is way better than that, because all the paths seem to intermingle and you can simply escape by just choosing the path of your choice. Now, halfway through the level, you actually get to fight Lolo, who I was talking about earlier. And Lolo has all his most iconic moves here, his little sliding blocks to try to hit you. And it's just a cool fight. You're actually fighting against the hero of their first game, which I guess to some degree makes Kirby a villain. I really didn't think about that when I was playing the game, but if you're fighting against the hero of the other game, I guess Kirby is a villain here. But at the close of the level, you actually get to fight against Lolo again, but you're actually getting to fight against him and his girlfriend, which is Lala. And so you're fighting against Lolo and Lala, and it's really simple here. You just sort of have to suck in the blocks they have and shoot the blocks back at them. And it took me a couple tries to actually beat the level, but it's just so cool to actually fight against Lolo and Lala. And like I said, I never thought of Kirby as a villain until now, but if he's fighting the heroes of the other game, Kirby's a villain. Now, the third level is called Float Islands, and it does a really good job of focusing on the island aesthetic here. I mean, all the enemies are based around the tropical environment. You got little hermit crabs, dancing around. I mean, seriously, look at these 3 hermit crabs in a row dancing to the music. Excellent. You also have little squids in the area. I mean, they did a really good job of just sort of working on the island aesthetic. They also have this little creature here that I never did like. It's just a little floating head, and he was in the NES Kirby game as well. And I've never liked this enemy, because it always reminded me of those little clowns you get as a kid, where they're full of air and you squeeze them and their eyes pop out and their ears pop out. And those toys were, they always sort of freaked me out as a kid. And this always reminded me of that. And I don't really know how to fit with the island aesthetic either, unless they're like harkening over to Easter Island. And maybe that's what they're doing, the giant heads of Easter Island. Maybe so. At least that would make sense as far as like the island aesthetic. But overall, this level is very similar to the last level as far as like lots of branching paths you can go off on. But they all just sort of lead to short little bonus areas, or they lead to alternate paths you can take to still reach the exit. And it allows for a lot of exploration and allows you to go back and play the game in different ways in the future too. Now, this level in particular, you're going to start seeing a lot of enemies in the future Kirby games that actually have special powers. If you sucked them in, you would gain that power. Like, I know you get this little ray beam in the other Kirby games. You see that, and later on you see the knights as well that throw out little blades. And I know you can get those powers in other Kirby games, and so it's just sort of weird to see those enemies and not be able to steal their powers. However, the game makes up for it by giving you all kinds of like individual power-ups. Like, you get like a lollipop that of course gives you like invincibility, or you can get like a little microphone that of course kills all the enemies on the screen. And so you get different little powers, like a rapid fire as far as like your breath that comes out, and I actually like the firepower in the future games. And so this game didn't necessarily have the stealing power mechanic, but the power mechanic is still there. You simply have to find items in order to get that power for a temporary boost. Now eventually you're going to get to the boss of Float Islands, and of course it's a little floating cannon here, floating because it's got a little blimp attached to it. And of course all you have to do is use your rapid fire move and continue to attack the blimp, and he's got a lot of health power behind it too, and so it'll take you a little while, but it's really not a difficult fight, but it's a fun little mechanic to sort of break up the normal side-scrolling action of a normal Kirby game. And a lot of Game Boy games tended to do this more than NES counterparts as far as like mixing gameplay up a little bit, because they want to, I guess, show the variety in gameplay, since maybe the colors and some of the dynamics might not be as vibrant on the Game Boy, so they tried to mix the gameplay up a little bit. I mean, Mario Land did it, some of the mechanics inside of Link's Awakening did it as well, and also some of the mechanics inside of Kirby here. It's like they're trying to mix the gameplay up a little bit, and I like the ingenuity of that. Now, the next stage is called Bubbly Clouds, and this is the hardest level in the game, and it's a noticeable step up in difficulty, because there's a lot of spots here that just sort of, I'm not going to say they're unfair, but there's just a lot of traps in it, because like there's a lot of these floaty heads here, and when you attack them, they start following you, and then they explode, and it's really difficult to escape and get away from them, and there's a ton of them inside this level. There's also these little demon heads that sort of follow you around a little bit as well. You know, it's weird that there's so many heads in this game. You got the demon heads, and the explosive heads, and the stone hinge heads in the last one. Just a lot of different enemies focused on the head in this game. But outside that, the level of course has some normal Kirby villains that become iconic throughout the series. Has a little umbrella guys, of course you can't take their power and get your own umbrella like the future Kirby games, but it's still cool to see that all the base enemies were present from the very beginning. Now of course the mini boss and then the final boss of this level is going to be this giant eyeball thing here. And the first time you fight him, he's actually, to me, more difficult than the second time. But of course, he shoots out little enemies. You have to suck him up and shoot him back at him. And the first time, he doesn't have a cloud formation around him. And it's a little bit difficult to track his movements. And the second time you fight him, he actually becomes like a cloud. And his movements are way more predictable. He just has a few more moves that he can attack you with. But I'll take the extra moves to attack me with over erratic movements any day. And so the second time is way easier than the first time. But he's still not too bad of an enemy. And the difficulty of the level far outweighed difficulty of the boss. Then you head off into the final stage, which is Mount Dedede, and of course you got a really cool little cutscene here. The Game Boy always tended to have really good cutscenes, and like I was saying earlier, even more than like some of the games on the NES, the Game Boy always tended to have really good cutscenes for a lot of these games. Obviously there's some out there that didn't have cutscenes at all and were very lacking, but some of the better Game Boy games had really great cutscenes because this came out at an era when it was going from NES to SNES, and SNES did have some really good cutscenes, and the Game Boy was sort of pulling from that a little bit. But regardless, when you get to Mount Dedede, it's like a Mega Man style level here. You have all four of the main bosses that you defeated earlier in the game, and of course you have to go in and defeat them again. And there's a little miniature level you have to go through and find yourself or find your Kirby clone, and then it opens up the boss door. You go in and fight the boss the exact same ways you fought him the first time. Pretty easy for most of them, and then you unlock King Dedede. Now King Dedede's, that's a lot of DDDs in a row, but the King Dedede, throw it out there again, it's like a boxing match almost, or a wrestling match, because there's a little wrestling ring around you, and he basically has this giant hammer. His moves are pretty iconic as well, because he's in the Smash Brothers games, and he tries to smash Kirby with his hammer, and of course when he does that, a little star comes out, and you can suck the star in and shoot it back at him, or when he jumps in the air and smashes down, little stars come out, and you can suck those in and shoot him back at him. That's the only way to attack him, so not all of his attacks on you produce that star for you to suck in and shoot back at him, so you just sort of have to wait out and time the attacks, or sort of fake him out a little bit to get him to do certain attacks to get that star to attack him. It did take me probably 2 or 3 tries to actually defeat him, but it wasn't too bad of a boss battle, and the overall difficulty of this game isn't super hard. Really outside of that 4th level, the game as a whole is pretty darn easy. That 4th level is pretty hard, and some of the bosses might take you a time or two, sort of get the mechanics down, but it's a pretty easy game as a whole. But once King Dedede is defeated, Kirby of course turns himself into this giant hot air balloon, and it's a really pretty funny cutscene here, and he floats the castle away, and of course when the castle gets to the top of the sky here, stars take it up from underneath it, and a little rains vegetables and fruit, and Kirby comes down, and of course that's when the credits begin to roll, and you're victorious. And of course, after a good while, Kirby thanks you for playing the game, and then it opens up the second quest for the game. Now the second quest for the game is basically the same as the first quest. There's not going to be like new bosses or anything. Some of the enemies are swapped out in the game, and some of them are faster and do more damage, have different attacks as far as like some of the bosses, as far as like mixing up their attack moves. But overall, it's pretty much the same game, just a little bit of a difficulty spike. For those true Kirby fans who want even more of a challenge, you can journey through the game that second time, and then you can unlock like a configuration mode. So there's actually some incentive to go back and play the game multiple times, And I like games that do that. When you defeat them, it gives you incentive to want to actually load the game back up again and challenge yourself once you've learned all the basic mechanics from the base game. And so Kirby actually has some decent replay value behind it. Now, one thing I didn't talk about a whole lot in this review that I mentioned at the very beginning, and I do want to sort of wrap up at the end here as well, is the soundtrack for this Kirby game is fantastic all the way through. Every level pretty much had an iconic soundtrack to go along with it. And I know the first one, or the opening track, is my theme song for my ringtone, but hey, I might mix it up a little bit and pick another one from the game to make it my ringtone, because they're all fantastic songs here. But overall, Kirby's Dream Land is a great start to the Kirby series. It's cool to see that all the basic Kirby stuff was there from the get-go, except for the ability to absorb powers. And that may have just been one of those things where they wanted it in the game, but they just didn't know how to necessarily program it that early on in the Game Boy's life cycle. But it's so cool to actually have all the basic Kirby stuff in there from the very beginning. And Kirby really, I mean, except for his color change, hasn't changed that much from the beginning. And that's just sort of rare for a character to stay the same for so long. If you haven't given Kirby's Dream Land a try, I highly recommend starting it up, giving it a full playthrough. It won't take but maybe like 20-30 minutes, probably 30-40 minutes actually. But it's a fairly short game, depending on if you want to do hard mode or not. But once again, this is the first of journeying through all the Game Boy games, Game Boy Color games, and sort of doing a breakdown and review or commentary of them. And if there's a Game Boy game you want to see, let me know in the comments down below, and I'll try to work that into the schedule pretty soon. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Check out my other videos listed up above. And as always, go out there, find that great game to play. Just simply have a great rest of the day.